Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. Guess who's back? Jim Lehrer. He's got a brand new book out. Super. It's so nice to have you here, Jim.
Oh, Teresa, it's always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
And when I was talking super just a moment ago, I was using that as a title and not an adjective, although this is a super book. Tell us about it.
Well, super is super as in the Super Chief, which was the Santa Fe Railroad's ultimate streamliner train. In fact, America's ultimate streamliner train for several years. It went from Chicago to Los Angeles, all Pullman, meaning all sleeping car train. The food was magnificent and beautifully served, and it went from Chicago to Los Angeles in 40 hours and 40 hours and half an hour, 40 and a half hours, and it became known as the Train of the Stars because the movie stars would ride that train from Los Angeles to Chicago, and then they'd get there in the morning, and then they'd have a big lunch at the Pump Room, a fancy restaurant in Chicago, and then they get on in the afternoon, the Broadway Limited or the 20th Century Limited, and go to New York. And all the famous movie stars would all go on those trains, and they were treated like stars. They had their aides on the trains with them. Some of them brought their dogs and all that sort of stuff. And my novel is just about one more or less round trip between Chicago and Los Angeles in the 1950s, where I put some movie stars on there, and former President Harry Truman. This was 1956, and 2 or 3 dead bodies, and that's it.
Well, it makes for a wonderful story, and you mentioned you have Harry Truman in this book, and in your acknowledgments you say you had to walk a wavy line between fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah.
Elaborate on that a little, because that is tricky.
Well, it is tricky, but it's fun.
Yeah.
When I decided to put Truman on the train, and let me tell you that Truman, the reason I put Truman on the train was because I think he was a terrific character, and long after he left the presidency, you know, he left with the lowest ratings of anybody in history, except one recent one, and but by now he's considered one of the great presidents. But at any rate, I went to school the last 2 years in college. I went to school at the University of Missouri. This was also in the 1950s, and Harry Truman came. He had a granddaughter, not a granddaughter, a niece, who taught at Missouri at that time. He lived in Independence. He had retired, and he came over to make a speech at the university. I was a journalism student, working for the daily newspaper that was part of the journalism school, and I was assigned to cover the speech. And so I heard him speak, and then when I was shaking when it was over, because I went over to him, I said, well, Mr. President, could I talk to you a minute? And he said, yeah, you want the speech? And I said, yes, sir, yeah. So he handed me his speech, the copy he was using, and the type was this big. I mean, clearly, he always had bad eyesight, but at any rate, I took the speech, and he said, you want to walk with me? I've got to go to the car. They're going to pick me up and take me back to Independence. And so I walked with him and interviewed him, and of course, I can't find that speech, by the way. It was too stupid, you know, to keep the thing. I wish I had. But anyhow, he was kind of my hero. Anyhow, I decided to put him on the train. And then once I realized that, once I did that, I realized, everything I do about Harry Truman has got to be 100% accurate.
Yes.
I mean, I'm fitting him into a fiction story, because he rode the Super Chief, but he didn't ride that Super Chief on that particular train with those particular people, and the things that I have happening did not happen. I made them up.
Yeah.
So, but when anything, I really did some research to make sure that the words of Harry Truman and the actions of Harry Truman, even though fictional, would ring true to anybody who knows. And another one, William Allen White, the famous newspaper man from Emporia, Kansas. I put him on there, his son on there, even though I changed his name. But even then, I knew people were going to make the connection, so I tried very hard on that. And Claudette Colbert,
That was fun.
I did a lot of research on her, because I just wanted to make sure that, but the fine line is mixing Harry Truman, Claudette Colbert, Clark Gable is another one who we won't ruin the story, but he's kind of on the train, and but every one of these things, even though they're with fictional, they're reacting to fictional characters, all of that. It was very important to me to make sure that they were as accurate as I could possibly make. In other words, their persona, the atmosphere around it, make it very accurate. But I love walking a fine line. I do that all the time. I love doing that in these books.
Well, you covered Truman as a journalist and then as a novelist. What did you learn about him as a novelist that you couldn't learn about him as a journalist?
Well, you know, there were no mysteries to unravel about this man, because I had, of course, done in researching the book. I mean, my book. I read, of course, David McCullough's marvelous book, Truman, and I did some other research and some other writings about him. And then when I got, it's an interesting question, Teresa, because then when I had to portray him, I made him a little rougher probably than he might have been otherwise, than he may have been in real life. I mean, he at the beginning, but then he shows some kind of human, more softer qualities as a character. That's what I have him doing anyhow. And I've had some people who read the book and who knew Truman, who said to me, "You got him, you got him." And of course, to me, that's high praise.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Particularly as a fiction writer, because you aim for the same authenticity you would have in nonfiction, and you did it.
If people don't believe it happened, they're not in fiction. They're not. I mean, they're not going to.
No.
It's not going to work.
Well, I felt like I knew him better. I had felt a special closeness to him after I read this book that I hadn't experienced from reading a straight history book about him. Publishers Weekly, in reviewing this book, said that it demonstrates, like so much of your work, your great love for simpler times. They're talking mid-20th century. They're talking Midwest. What about that region, that place and time appeals to you so much?
You know, Teresa, what happens, what's happened to me, I will not generalize, what's happened to me is the older I have gotten, the more it's not nostalgic, it's nostalgia at all. The more I think about and consider where I came from and what I was doing from the day I was born until now. And so, why am I this way? Why am I that way? Well, what happened in Kansas when I was a little boy, and then those experiences and those stories, they all have come back. And so when a story comes back, the setting comes back as well. So if I'm thinking of a story that happened when I was 12 years old in Wichita, Kansas, Wichita comes back. And so, and I want to write about it, and because it's as you know, writers only have one thing to do when they have an idea, and that's to write. And so it all comes, if you happen to believe as I do, and I bet you do, that all fiction is essentially autobiographical. It has to be. If you're going to write about some of these things, the human experience, you don't have to have experienced it, you know, in a rote way, but you have to have you have to have had experiences that that you can build on and all that sort of stuff. So I've ended up this book, Super, the three books, the last 2 or 3 novels have all been set in Kansas or around those places, and one of them was set in Missouri, but it came out of a Kansas experience that, for fiction reasons, I transferred it to Missouri, and I just realized that that's who I am, and not completely, but that's who I was, and that's who I am now. When I sit down to write a story, whether it's about a train or a bus or whatever, I become a little boy again. And you know, Bernard Malamud said, if you're going to be a writer of fiction, you better not ever allow yourself to get over 16 years old.
Isn't that a great line? I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that before. We get to know you pretty well through your memoirs. I mean, they're terrific. I'm especially fond of A Bus of My Own. That's a terrific book. If you were to go back and write that book today, how would you change it? How have you changed since then?
Well, I don't know how I've changed. I'll tell you what I would do. I'm probably not going to do it, but I restrained myself all the way through, because I'm writing about myself, but I'm also writing about my family and people I love and loved me and people that, and I decided to tell stories rather than to settle any scores or in any way whatsoever hurt anybody's feelings.
Yes.
It's not worth it. I'm a fiction writer. Whatever I have to say about anything like that, I can do it in my fiction writing. I'm not going to write a memoir and beat up on somebody who was bad to me when I was a newspaper man in Texas or whatever, real or imagined. And but a lot of the stories that I told in my memoir, I didn't go all the way, and in fact, somebody said that to me. You didn't tell the whole story, and I said, that's right, and I'm not going to. A lot of it is in my head too, and my own emotions, and I'm just, as I say, if I'm going to write about emotional things, I'll do that in my fiction, not in my memoirs.
Well, I think that's a point well said. Somebody told me that with my memoir, I always pull my punches, you know.
Well, yours is a perfect example.
But I did
you
exactly.
didn't beat up on anybody.
But when you said that, it registered with me, and I thought about it. One of the things you are very forthcoming about in both your memoirs, your heart challenges, the problems you've had with heart disease. And I don't want to go so far as to say that these problems have been blessings in your life, but there has been a positive impact too.
Absolutely, absolutely. I had a heart attack over 25 years ago. What it did was settle my mind and my energies on how I wanted to spend the rest of my life, not knowing how long I had. And I was fortunate to have a doctor who said, you know, you ought to use this as an opportunity to examine everything that you do. And I said, like what? Thanks, doctor, that's very helpful. And he said, oh, just make a list. Just literally make a written list of everything you do that eats up energy, eats up time, causes stress, whatever. So I did, you know, and I had job, family, all that kind of stuff on the list, and all down to some, you know, I don't know, 30, 40 things on there. And he said, now go back and eliminate half of them. I'm going to eliminate them from what? He said, eliminate them from your life. And so I did that, and in the process, I realized my writing had gone a little bit by the wayside because we had small children, and I was working in daily journalism, which was a stressful kind of thing, ate up a lot of time. And but now our children, by the time of the heart attack, our children were older then, and I decided, well, all excuses are off, so I wanted to really get back to my writing. Well, of the many books I've written over 20 books. All but 2 of them have been written since that heart attack, and because I just really got into it. And so once I eliminated all the things that I didn't want to do, I also found out I had plenty of time to do what I did want to do. And so I write a little bit every day. I have been for 25 years, and that's why I'm able to write so many books.
Do you think that that kind of reckoning would be good for us as a nation too, that when we have crises, and of course we want to respond to them and do everything, but we can learn from them too? Well,
there's history that bears that out. We're living through it right now. We've had this terrible economic recession. Thousands, millions of people have been hurt, lost their jobs, and lost their houses, lost their dreams about whether or not their children can go to college, and all those sort of things. But in the process, those people, you know, some of those people will never recover from that. But in the process, a lot of wasted motion has now gone by the wayside forever. For instance, you could, from a corporate standpoint, look at the American automobile companies. If it hadn't been for the recession, they would have eventually gone under because they deserved to go under.
Yeah, exactly.
But now they've refashioned themselves, and you know, maybe they'll survive a little bit. In some of the governmental areas where they thought, well, we need these resources to get this done or get that done, and now they've discovered, for instance, maybe we don't need as large a military as we thought we did because we don't have the money, have as much money. A lot of things like that can happen. Clearly, Watergate, huge thing years ago, really gave a huge boost to American journalism. That is still there are results of that still here, and there are a lot of things like that. But sometimes, if you're the victim of one of these things, it's not any solace at all.
No.
But there are about it. And on a personal level, for me, I wish I hadn't had the heart attack. Yet I'm glad I did. Then, of course, I had just 2 years ago I had another heart problem where I had open heart surgery again to replace a heart valve, and it was a different experience for me. I'd been through it once, I can do it again. But it also refocused my mind one last time, realizing, okay, now it's, you know, just rethink some things again, and it's been terribly helpful. But I just soon not have to do it.
On the news, you're known for your great objectivity. Do you ever feel pressured by the standards you set for yourself? Because as you're writing and talking about some of these things that are frustrating to all of us, the Gulf spill, BP, all of these sorts of things, you've got to feel the same angers, the same sense of awful frustration that we all do, but it never shows.
Well, you know, it's a matter of function, Teresa. I just, when I'm involved in reporting a story, I am so focused on trying to get it right, or trying to think of the right questions, or trying to move the story in some way. I don't have time to waste trying to judge whether or not somebody's right, or whether somebody's wrong, or whether I agree with them or I don't agree with them. And I made a decision 40-some years ago that I was going to be in the what happened part of America. There are three pieces of journalism. There's the straight news, what happened, then there's why it happened, that's analysis journalism, and then there's what you should think about it, that's opinion journalism. I'm in the first part. So that's my job, that's my function. And so I never sit frustrated at the table interviewing somebody wanting to yell, liar! I don't even, it doesn't occur to me. I don't do that. A lot of people are waiting for me to do it. They're going to wait a lifetime for that.
Well, many times you don't have to, because they give themselves the way.
That is exactly my feeling about it. You just ask a couple more questions, and you know the public can, the audience can figure out what's going on. And but it's my job is to provide the audience the evidence so they can make their own judgments and yell. They can yell liar, but I'm not going to.
But then you can take on all of these issues with the one-eyed Mac. I mean, what a great character. You know, I love that character, and Mac to the Rescue, one of my favorite books. But he can, you know, say all of these things. He can call people liar.
Oh,
he can do all of that sort of thing. So you've got this great...
I love that character for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, so you've got your bully pulpit. I mean, you got it. You've got it there.
But I always have to say, oh, no, this is fiction.
It is fiction.
You know,
it is fiction.
I'm not really the one-eyed man. A lot of people have caught me up on that. Said, you are Mac, and don't act like you're not Mac. And I say, well, I'm not Mac. I'm not Mac. I repeat after, you know, put my hand on the Bible, and that's it.
I've asked you before what have been some of the most challenging moments for you on the NewsHour. What about some of the most rewarding moments on the NewsHour when you were behind that desk?
You know, the rewarding moments come, you know, remember now we're up to 35 years doing the NewsHour, or the McNeil-Lehrer report before. There have been so many rewarding moments. It's hard to, the rewarding moments come when, not unexpectedly necessarily, because if you do your homework, you're not there to be, you're there to be open-minded enough and done your homework well enough to where you can be surprised. In other words, you're not so closed in that, oh, I've got a series of questions, you know, they've got to ask this question no matter what. You know, my favorite example, you know, about Senator, should we sell more grain to Cuba? Yes, Jim, we should sell more grain to Cuba, but before we do that, we should bomb Havana. And I say, what kind of grain, Senator? Because I'm so focused on my questions, I didn't hear the answer. So you have to be open to these revelations and that. So, but the kinds of things that, for instance, I interviewed a woman who had an American who met a Chinese student together at Columbia University. They got married, went back to China in the 1930s, and they went through all the revolutions. The communist, World War II, the communist revolution, everything. And then her husband died in the 1990s, and she came back to the United States to live. And I interviewed her about her experiences in China, and then what it was like to come back here. And I'm telling you, Teresa, I remember what that woman said like it was yesterday. She described, she compared what walking down the street in Beijing, what was then called Peking, was like, with what walking down the street in Boulder, Colorado was like. And the different, and all of the things that we know instinctively and by experience as Americans, and know just from afar, where it is somewhere where there is no freedom, where the freedom to walk down the street is not part of your life. And this woman described that. knowing, comparing the two, not in any negative way, really.
No, I know
She was
what you're
just
saying.
talking as a human being. And she's a very articulate woman, obviously, and I'll remember that. I tend to remember those kinds of things rather than interviewing Bill Clinton the day the Monica Lewinsky
yeah.
story broke, stuff like that. That's big time stuff.
Oh, sure.
And that's what I do professionally, and those things are important to me as a professional.
Sure.
But the things that I really remember as an individual journalist, as an individual person who interviews people, are things like the revelation of this one, because I didn't expect her to be, and I was crying.
Yeah.
I was crying to a point where I couldn't close the program.
Yeah.
I just looked down and said, "Thank you." Her name was Lowe, Ruth Lowe, and I said, "Thank you, Ms. Lowe," and I said, "Thank you and good night," kind of with my eyes like this, because I was bawling like a child. Because completely unexpectedly, she moved me so.
The NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has now become the PBS NewsHour. Why did you decide to de-emphasize your role? And you were the one who made that decision.
Sure, I made the decision, Teresa. There are a couple of reasons. First of all, I thought it was time for us we need to, in this new world order of journalism, we need to be part of the solution. And we need to kind of open our eyes a little bit, and not more than a little bit, we're more than a little bit, and expand laterally as well as vertically. In other words, get our online stuff and be, and get to a point where, and when I tell people all the time, I don't care now if you watch the NewsHour on your pink iPod with your name engraved on it. Doesn't matter to me as long as you watch it.
Exactly.
I don't care where you get our information as long as you get it. We are no longer just an appointment television program. And also I thought it was a good opportunity, this program, television news programs in particular, are built about anchor people, built on it. Our programs always had my name on it, or Robin's name on it, Robert McNeil's name on it. And I realized that as I've got to be, I'm 76 years old. This all really started when I was 75, and I realized that, yes, I still have energy. Yes, I still have little boy interest, little girl interest in the news and all of that. But there are other things that I'm going to kind of relax a little bit and take a little more time to do the things that I enjoy. And we do. My wife Kate and I have 3 daughters and 6 grandchildren. I want to spend more time. I mean, I know that's an old cliche, but it's true. I want to spend more time with them. So the way to do it, but I didn't want to make a big to-do about it. Oh well, Lehrer's leaving, and his name's coming off the program, and now what's going to happen? Well, also we had spent 2 or 3 years developing a team for the program, so I just decided that if I got my name off of it, it just became a member of the team. Yeah, sure. When I'm there, I always say I'm the guy who says good evening, says good night. And I'm still the executive editor. I'm still the boss.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in journalism, if you're not the boss, it can be hell.
Well, we know that's true. That's true.
So, but I wanted also I wanted to set the stage for me to be free to do whatever I wanted to do. In other words, if I decide if I go back to Washington from Tulsa, and I go in the office and say, I don't think I want to do this anymore. Well, now I can do that without causing disrupting people's lives or disrupting people's concern, because they are now used to seeing people are now used to our program that on the air that is not dominated by me, and it is not dependent on me. And so so that gives me the freedom to stay as long as I want or to leave whenever I want to. So that's the bottom line.
There's some great new DVDs out that showcase some of the special things that you've done on the NewsHour. One, the poets that you've had.
Oh, yeah.
Another one called The Legacy of Integration. Did you have any idea when you first started covering civil rights that one day that we'd have an African-American president?
Never. I covered civil rights in Texas, and I worked in a bus depot in the 1950s in South Texas, in Victoria, Texas, where it was fully segregated. Water fountains, restrooms, cafe. African Americans had to sit in the back of the bus, and also in South Texas, Latinos weren't treated any better. And to see what has happened, and now to have an African American president is astonishing to me, and I think it is to anybody who was around and who was cognizant of what was going on those years. In other words, was around and lived, saw, and observed or experienced the life of segregation in America. And to see where we are now, with Barack Obama is just it boggles the mind in a good way.
Mm-hmm. The other feature I mentioned, you highlighted poets on the NewsHour. Why poetry? It's part of the news broadcast.
We take the position. It's because a lot of people ask that question. You know, viewers say, "What are you doing with these poets on there?"
It's a news program.
Great. Yeah. Well, what I say to them, hey, we think poetry is the part of the way that people communicate about things that matter, and it isn't about poetry necessarily. It's about what people say in poetry. And of course it's about, most poetry is about the human spirit, it's about what people think and what people feel, and that fits my definition of news. And it fits my definition of reporting. You're reporting about something inside more than you're reporting something on the outside, but it's still reporting.
We began the show, Jim, by talking about the Super, and let's close by swinging back to it. It's going to be out in paperback soon.
Yes, in the spring.
You've got new books, I'm sure, that are on the agenda.
I do.
Okay. Do you try to do a book a year?
Pretty much so. We're going to delay it a little bit. I've got a nonfiction book called Tension City that's coming out next fall, and it's about my moderating presidential debates.
Oh, that's going to be good.
George H.W. Bush said in an interview with me, he said, I asked him about what that was like. He said, oh, those big debates, Jim, they're Tension City. So that's what I've used as the title. Then I have another novel I'm working on.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Teresa. It's always a pleasure. Congratulations to you for everything you do.
Oh, that means a lot to me. And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.